Well, hi there. I'm Diana Montford, the world's first transgender television journalist. Born male, became female. I always have to say that because of the hair. They say, what direction are you going in? I'm not so sure. But anyway, we always have fabulous guests, don't we? I mean, you love the guests. I love the guests. We all love the guests. Well, most of them. But some guests are maybe just a little more special than others. We're all born equal, but some of us just a little more. My guest is a woman you see all the time on television, someone you've known for many years and will continue to know for many more, the truly legendary journalist, Miss Anne Northrop. And here she is.
Wow. Wow.
You are
Thank
a legend.
you.
You are. You and the equally legendary Andy Hum.
Who will be here eventually this spring.
But not on this show, but he will be on the show later.
Yeah.
Not tonight, but some other time soon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you know what's in the offing. You know what's in the offing. Ah, Trump.
It's scary and sad. It's horrible. To quote a famous living American, Donald J. Trump, who I believe with the scheduling of this show will be inaugurated tomorrow.
God help us.
I mean, I have to stop myself several times a day and say, President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. It's what we used to call surrealism in everyday life.
Or Dadaism.
Yes.
I mean, please.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I'll wake up soon. This is a nightmare I'm having. There cannot be a President Trump. I mean, please.
Yes, there can, and I've been watching this coming down the road for a long time now, of course, for the last year and a half since he first announced, and I think people have made a real mistake not understanding that this was going to happen, that this is the country we're living in, and for both good and bad, because what this really is an attempted revolution. And I'm in favor of revolution. I'm in favor of shaking things up, stirring the pot, killing the gridlock, really thinking in new ways. It's just that these were not the ways I anticipated us thinking.
Well, everyone says, well, the disaffected white working class who can't work because there are no jobs have voted him into power.
That's part of it. I don't think that's the whole story.
What do you think is the whole story?
I think people are sick and tired of the gridlock. Now, the ironic part of this is that the people who caused the gridlock are the Republicans, the people who refused to work with Obama for the last 8 years, the people who got up and yelled at him liar when in his first State of the Union address.
If he'd done that in Spain, that man who did that, there's a law called disrespect to the office of president. He would have been in jail.
Well, and of course, in other legislatures, you see fistfights all the time around the world. So anything can happen. But when the Republicans had dinner before Obama was inaugurated and planned to obstruct everything he did, that set the tone, and that's what's been going on for the last 8 years. And Washington has been slowly sinking into a bog before then, and certainly the Bush years were no picnic, and left us in an economy that was about to crash.
And that's the point. They always blame Obama, but it wasn't Obama. He inherited this horrifying recession.
Yes, and did a semi-brilliant job of pulling us out of it. But the Republicans very deliberately set up
him at every point.
Every point they could, and then turned around and said, we have to shake up the system, and sold this bunch of nonsense to the American people, who really have been the victims of lying, big money, right-wing creeps,
exactly.
And thus we have this, which is a kind of phony revolution, and one that they have created inadvertently with their obstructionism.
But the phony revolution might lead to a real one. When people realize that their medical care is gone, they will riot in the streets. I mean, I heard you say on Rich Speziale's show several weeks ago that this would turn into a time not unlike the late 1960s when people were, you know, protesting the Vietnam War and everything. Yes, because whenever you mess with the middle class, you're in trouble. If you mess with the working class, they have limited venues for, you know, any kind of protest. But when you mess with the middle class, such as drafting and killing their sons or taking away their medical care, now you're in trouble.
Well, I'd like to think so. I'm of two minds about this because I see how nefarious the right wing is and how they can mess with people in all sorts of ways and yet convince people that it's the Democrats' fault. And they're not going to give up that kind of approach. So I'm concerned about that. On the other hand, I take heart from a couple of recent examples, and that they are the protest at Standing Rock on the pipeline in the Dakotas, where people, including not just the Native American population, but then veterans and activists. It was quite a diverse group of people who went to support them in very rough weather. And stay outside and stand up for that. And the fact that they had at least a temporary victory, I'm not convinced it's going to stand up.
With the Trump administration, it might be overturned.
Exactly. But they had a victory, and that was surprising because we're not used to the people being able to have that kind of victory these days because we're so used to the powers that be overcoming everything the people want. And the other thing that gave me some optimism was this fight over the independent ethics office in Congress.
Which they did away with and then, thank God, reinstituted later that night, I think.
Well, they had a secret meeting of the Republicans in the House, unannounced. They went in there. Some extreme right-wingers proposed this because they were sick of having to be held accountable for their corruption and their dirty dealings. And even Paul Ryan didn't want them to do it, but they passed this proposed amendment that would undercut the independent ethics office by folding it under the House Ethics Committee so they could control it. But the New York Times wrote about it that night. They got word of it. They wrote about it, and people lost their minds. They suddenly everyone is Googling who their member of Congress is. They're calling their offices. They're enraged, and all that happened overnight and early the next morning. And all of that was before Trump tweeted about it. He wants to take credit for this, but it was before that. And his tweet supported what the right-wingers had done. He just said the timing was off. He said the amendment was fine. It was just a little too soon.
Every time Trump tweets, he subtracts from the sum total of human knowledge.
Well, nonetheless, I was quite proud of the U.S. population that stood up and did that. And if we keep doing that, that's why I think the women's marches this weekend are so important. And they're for everybody, of course.
Well, men are also allowed. So
everybody.
Don't think it's only for women. The problem is...
Non-binary march.
Yes, and you don't... Women-born women and non-women-born.
Everybody, please.
Men, bodybuilders.
Dogs, bring your dog.
Yes, and cats and parakeets and fish and everything.
Because we had, to get back to what you said at the top, we have to start getting out into the streets. We cannot count on the Democrats have no power now. The right wing is still cruising along with its money and its majority.
They can very easily pass a law just doing away with the right of dissent.
Well, I'm not quite that cynical. I lived through the Vietnam War. I know.
I was this close. If I hadn't been so queer, I would probably have died in Phnom Penh or something.
Well, I was out in the streets. I wasn't subject to the draft, but I know that we stopped that war by being in the streets. And I know that the civil rights movement had the successes it did by being in the streets, that when a critical mass of people gets into the streets, we have a chance of overcoming evil, but we have to all take responsibility for that.
The thing is, Trump used to be a Democrat, and God knows, given his lifestyle, he's no one's idea of a born-again Christian or something. I mean, he's very... he's not, a tremendously conservative person. He might be a fiscal conservative, but he's certainly not personally.
He's an opportunist.
Yeah.
And he saw aligning with the conservatives as his route to power. And as long as he wants to have power, he will do what he has to do to maintain it, and that means aligning with the conservatives. He's not going to suddenly demonstrate some liberal streak because that's what he feels. He's a puppet. He is a puppet, and the puppet masters are Mike Pence and Steve Bannon and the Family Research Council and
even some other people,
the Heritage Foundation and the Koch brothers and the ALEC people and all of that.
What about reproductive rights? What's going to happen to? I mean, and that's the main concern.
Well, it's certainly a main concern. Here's the problem. Start with the Supreme Court, and and this is totally at the bidding of the right-wing evangelicals. They want right-wing people on the Supreme Court. He has a seat to fill now. Now it's Scalia's seat, so you could say, all right, so they ram a conservative in there. It's not any worse than it was. But yes, the Democrats are old. They're all 80-ish or older.
Well, Ruth, like 84, 85.
She's 83, I think, and Kennedy's like 78, and Breyer's old too. And all he needs is one more seat, and he's got 4 years to have that happen, and that's certainly a high possibility. And then you do start to worry about reproductive rights.
What if it happens after the midterm elections, when I'm sure many Republicans will be voted out of office because people will be fed up? If it happens after the midterm elections, Democrats can do what the Republicans did and refuse to even consider okaying a candidate.
It's a lovely scenario, but each 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. 2 years from now, the third of the Senate that's up for re-election is 28 Democrats and 5 Republicans. So the chances of our taking over the Senate are
if
zero.
We're lucky, it will stay status quo.
Yes. And meanwhile, some of those Democrats who are up for re-election in 2 years in states where Trump won are going to be voting with the Republicans because they're scared they're going to lose their seat. And so what good are they to us as Democrats? People like, well, I don't know exactly who's up for re-election, but there are Democrats who will vote with the Republicans. And in the House, you have everything so gerrymandered in those districts that the districts have been set up so that the Republicans have very safe districts all over the country. It's going to be very hard to get most of them out of office.
Do you think that taking it to the streets will change everything?
I think it's the only hope we have. And I think, people don't, they're afraid of doing things like that. They think it's too much work or too dangerous, or I don't want to do all that. I want to just... A lot of why we have the result we have is because people just don't want to pay attention, or they want to remain ignorant, they don't want to act.
Why did we care so much in the 60s, and why are they so apathetic today? Even people who were around in the 60s are, I just want to watch TV, leave me alone.
Well, we're old now. But the draft had a lot to do with activism in the 60s, and there was a whole different atmosphere of action. We were in the midst also of the civil rights movement, and the LGBT movement was getting started, and the feminist movement. There was a lot going on, and there was a whole gestalt of action. Now, you cannot underestimate or overestimate the effect of the big money, really relentless right-wing groups. The Alliance Defending Freedom, which is their legal group. The
it's very Orwellian.
It
Slavery is freedom.
Yes.
War is peace.
Yes, but they have very deliberately taken these billions of dollars and poured them into elections and legislation from the ground up, and they have beaten people down. Voter suppression, just
playing fast and loose with the laws so that people, oh, sorry, you're not registered, so sorry.
Yes, and lying to people. You know, black is white and white is black. They have convinced people that they can't have an effect, or they're going to, you know, there's a great hunger, I think, for paternalism. I don't think we should. Well, people want a daddy to take care of them as human beings, where it's a sort of general yearning, I think. But what I want to teach people or convince them of is that they don't have to turn over their whole life to activism. They don't have to risk their families or livelihood or anything. If everybody just does a little, if you call your congressional representative's office once a week, if you write a letter occasionally, if you go to a peaceful legal demonstration occasionally, it can all add up to what we need. It's just if everybody makes a small effort, it will add up to enough. No one has to take full responsibility for all this, but we all have to take a little responsibility.
Many people are afraid that in this economy, fostered by the Republicans, that they will lose their jobs, and, you know, given, you know, the difficulties in getting unemployment and everything, that they will be truly destitute and live out in the streets.
These are real concerns. People are living on the edge and have real issues. But they have to look at what people need to certainly pay attention and be informed, and there's too little of that going on. Interestingly, with the explosion of media, it has somehow made people less informed in some ways.
And now you can't even trust it because there is fake news.
Oh, we see it every day. And we don't know many days what is real and what is fake. You know, the stories about Trump and Russia, what is real and what is fake, who knows? We don't have any good evidence at the moment. And, you know, he doesn't trust the CIA. Well, some days I don't trust the CIA
I've
either.
never trusted the CIA, so there you are.
You know, we come from a long history of not trusting the CIA.
Yes.
So,
peace.
Yeah. So I don't know how we negotiate that. But I think it is incumbent upon us to stay informed. You're not going to lose your job from making a phone call to your member of Congress. And I take very seriously people's needs and the very edgy conditions we're living under. But think about what really is the answer and who's really going to help you. And it isn't going to be the little fairy prince who's taking charge.
No. Although rumor has it he's quite the opposite. According to him, he's a roan stallion.
Well, that's immediately what you have to start questioning when people are talking.
Bragging that way, yes.
Exactly.
But what I don't know about small hands or anything, and I don't want to know.
No, either. But here's what I worry about with him. You ask about reproductive rights. That's a real concern because they can chip away at it in so many ways.
It has a great effect on women's rights in general.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about the cancellation of LGBT rights across the board. Here's what's happened. We do not have a national non-discrimination law for sexual orientation and gender identity. Some states have it, some cities have it, but it is not a universal thing, which comes as a great shock to a lot of people. What? There's no non-discrimination law? No, we can be fired.
That's why we have North Carolina, Houston, all these little city ordinances telling people that, you know.
And beyond. You know, we have more than 20 states that have no protection for people's employment, housing, public accommodations. You can be refused service in a restaurant. You can be refused housing. You can be thrown out of your job just for who you are. So, so we need those protections. But,
Rich, do you know the time?
I think we have another 8 or 9 minutes.
Oh, good.
So we couldn't pass this law in a Republican Congress. We have tried to pass a comprehensive non-discrimination law, and we can't do it with the Republicans in charge. So what Obama did was issue some executive orders. people, contractors, businesses that do business with the federal government are not allowed to discriminate. That covers about a quarter of the workforce.
Certainly in today's depressed economy.
Yes. And the government itself can't discriminate. And he made all sorts of rules. You know, you can't discriminate in hospital visitation. You can't discriminate in housing rules in federal housing.
The problem of religion comes up.
Well, here's the first problem. Trump is going to cancel all those executive orders. So all those protections that Obama has been able to put in place little by little, gone. And he's going to cancel executive orders that protect women and that protect other people across the board. And that is just going to, with a stroke of a pen, the minute he gets in office, that is all going to disappear. And that is a tragedy and very, very scary. So that is the first thing we have to worry about. Then he is very hot to pass. I mean, he doesn't care, but the Republicans are hot to pass this First Amendment Defense Act, which is all about even though you have a non-discrimination law that protects women and people of color and LGBT, this new law will say if you have a religious objection to any of these people, if their existence violates your religious beliefs, you can forget discrimination laws. You are allowed to make your own rules.
And people who are atheists will invent religions to their own economic advantage.
I don't think the atheists are the people you have to worry about.
No, but what I'm saying is people are not religious will invent religions, you know?
Well, the people who claim to be religious but aren't running a church, for instance. I'm an atheist too. So, but it's, you know, people, churches certainly have the right to conduct their business their way in religious rituals.
Yes and no.
Well, they're certainly allowed to decide who they will marry and who they won't. And in religious jobs, they're allowed to hire who they want.
Like all the gay priests? Yeah.
Exactly. But they, when they're doing more secular things, they are not allowed to discriminate. But now people in any kind of business will be allowed to claim a religious exemption.
I can start a religion tomorrow and say, I just do not like people who dye their hair purple. And if you have purple hair, don't come anywhere near me. And I will be defended by the law.
You don't even have to invent a religion. You just have to say, I have a religious objection, period.
Oh, and I don't even have to state what it is.
No.
Great.
So that's what we have to look forward to. In the,
what can we do about it to save ourselves, to not be swept away into jails and concentration?
Well, this is where the activism comes in on a daily basis. This is if, you know, hundreds of thousands of phone calls to Congress could stop them from killing the independent ethics office, hundreds of thousands or millions of phone calls to Congress and threats to throw people out of office can stop anything, including the First Amendment Defense Act. And believe me, they will try to sell it with lies all over the place. Oh, those poor Christians who are being discriminated against because they can't practice their religion.
To those gay lions, it's so sad. Yeah.
Exactly. So it is a very simple matter of speaking up, of staying informed about what's going on, and just being willing to pick up that phone and make a phone call or go to...
Or email or something.
Yeah. Well, as my colleague Andy Hum says, what has been proven is that, in fact, the phone calls are the most effective.
Really? I didn't know that.
Well, I emailed a couple of senators the other day. It took me 5 minutes to just write an email to Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren about these hearings.
On our side, yeah.
Yeah, but they have to, you have to hold their feet to the fire. You have to let them know that that you want them
sure.
to.
And that you're watching.
Yes.
But you are Ann Northrop. If Joan Smith does it, how much are they going to care?
Absolutely, they're going to care. If you are a constituent of theirs and you are someone who cares enough to pick up the phone and call, they know that you also care enough to go out and work against them and for their opponent in the next election. They know that they have to pay attention to people who are willing to be active.
Now, they could theoretically take your show and my show off the air and say, you know, we have a religious objection to those people.
Well, you know, we're on public access TV, and it is cable systems have franchise agreements with cities.
That, yes.
And they're mandated to make these public access channels available, and they're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. So theoretically, we are not going to be thrown off the air. So I'm not so concerned about that. I think because governments are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of gender, sexual orientation, certainly in this city.
They're not now. They might be a year or 2 years.
I don't see, well, religious freedom laws could trump a lot of this. We are lucky enough to be in New York City where so far the administration is not coming after us.
Excuse me, de Blasio, I was talking to him on the radio with Brian Lehrer, and he said, don't worry, we're a city-state. We can trump any national law and keep our LGBTQ community safe. Andy Hum told me that's not true.
Well, it's not true, theoretically, but so it's another reason to remain vigilant and active.
Okay, bottom line, make sure your elected officials know that you object to any kind of discrimination, but obviously especially LGBTQ discrimination, but any kind of discrimination. My guest has been the wonderful, amazing, groundbreaking, and historic journalist. You've made history, you know this, you and Andy.
Yeah.
You changed everything.
Okay.
Thank
you.
That was easy. Want to buy a car? No. The fabulous Ms. Ann Northrop. And I'm the not necessarily fabulous, but not too shabby.
Please.
No false modesty. I'm glorious.
Yes.
Diana Montford. Hey, I love you. Even if no one else loves you, I love you. Take good care of yourself. Mwah. Love you a lot. See you next time.
Thanks, Diana.
My pleasure. And we still have 20 seconds left.